Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Nightlight. I'm starting off the week and Barbara will be doing her show on Thursday. Since our last broadcast, we got an extra hour of sunlight. Yay! We're getting to summer. We have a return guest this evening. Podcaster, author, explorer Jared Murphy is here. Just a couple days after Christmas, Jared's our guest discussing his recent publication, It's Not Aliens, Worse, It's Us. There is more in his captivating book that we didn't get to, so we'll be covering more of the diverse ancient mysteries he has been researching. You can learn more about Jared by going to his website, notaliens.com. Hi, Jared. How you doing? Thanks for returning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Looking forward to it. Recently, the boss, Solaris, Mary, all the, Gloria, whoever else has been chipping in information to Nightlight. There have been a bunch of talks about Atlantis and ancient sacred texts, ancient documentation of biblical characters suddenly being transformed into having superhuman or paranormal powers, healthy living. She's got a little bit of all these different subjects, but we find Jared combining all these topics in his book. I think what we've done recently is just, Jared's just going to extend the information, take us into new directions, and just present more information on some fascinating information. One of the topics that we didn't get to the first time is ancient longevity, extreme longevity, and we thought, that'd be a interesting way to start the show off tonight. And most of that is documented prior to Noah's flood. So, Jared, let's take a look at some of the examples. We know, Methuselah, Enoch, I think, lived to nearly 1,000 years old. Is extreme, just extreme old age. Um, let let's get your take on difference in aging before and after the flood.
Yeah, it's such a broad part of our past that gets overlooked or thought of as interesting. And before I even get to that, I appreciate you having me back on again. And it's always fun. I don't think people know what an extent, as far as like outside of the show, I appreciate just all the insights you've had and the amount of work you've put into, I've been on shows, but I am going to out you as being someone who actually reads the work, which is cool. I'm not saying everyone has to because not every host has time, but I really appreciate the efforts you put into reading my book, by the way. I just want to say thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Barbara and I hear that a lot from publishing companies and authors, and we do really try to have a reasonable book review, and we put a lot of work into it, but it pays off with guests who want to return reviews. So thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, well, I wasn't just throwing, I just wanted to point it out because it is fun to, part of the work in my book is to go over the fact that it's not aliens versus it's us. Discovering our lost history literally means that there's so much to go over. I actually didn't think about it until, it's been out now barely a year, and it's crazy to think the detail and the complexities of an ancient high-tech human past, and people get stuck on the giant stones, the giant polygonal masonry, and there's so much there, but what they don't get further on is the other slivers of truths, which is our focus tonight, which is specifically in the spectrum of everything that makes our mysterious past so interesting is these echoing remnants, whether it's in the Bible or the Sumerian culture of the longevities of ancient kings and people like Enoch. And Enoch's really interesting. He's mentioned by Christ himself. Wallace Wagner, who I've just done an interview with for the second time, and he's someone you introduced me to, and here's a book that covers UFOs in the Bible, and we talk extensively about Enoch. And okay, so for those that don't know, Methuselah lived to be the oldest, but coming up in a close second at, like, depending on the version, 994 to 997 years, you'll never guess. It was Jared. That is how I got my name, my dad, out of the Bible. And Jared is the second.
Page 202.
Yeah. So Jared is the second oldest living, at least biblically speaking, right? And I never get a chance to get into this. So it's going to be really fun. So what we're covering is what are the slivers of truths that have echoed through time that indicate not only a highly advanced, which is what my book is about, is that not only is there physical evidences, but there's like remnants in stories that show that humanity at some point was able to genetically repair itself, was able to live indefinite periods, but it got mystified, it got deified, and it got turned into a religion. And part of that is looking at two charts within my book, and, well, within history, but I have it in the book, so if you want to reference it, it's in the book. But it's about the ages of not just kings, but people and individuals in the Bible. You have Methuselah, you're as old as Methuselah, and then Jared, and then like Enoch lived to 365 years. But what's interesting about Enoch is that he's mentioned not only multiple times in the Old Testament, and there have been so many books written about it. Of course, it's one of the foundational elements for Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. And the Book of Enoch is still in the Ethiopian Bible, the Christian Bible. And, of course, Enoch is referenced by Christ. He's referenced in the Old Testament. But they did not canonize in the Roman Catholic Church the Book of Enoch because basically, in a nutshell, as you all know from Chariots of the Gods, Enoch describes space travel. He describes travel in spaceships. He describes the Earth from a spaceship, a viewing deck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem for even back then when they were scratching their heads. This was not a book they could keep in. However, Enoch was so holy, in quotes, that they still kept in the references. So they're not making, just for those who go looking, Enoch is mentioned and the book is taken out except for the Ethiopian Christian Bible, but yet he was so holy they had to leave him in because they believed his canon that even though he wasn't canonized within the Holy Roman Bible, he was actually considered to be worthy. So his references are left in. So that in itself is an interesting rabbit hole for people who want to go down that road. But at 365 years, he's taken by God. Or if we want to get into some of Scotty Allen Roberts' work
Mm-hmm.
and the translations, the issue is that it's not a God, it's the gods. And also Von Daniken's and a number of people, that the Elohim are not a God, but the gods. And heaven is not a extra etherical place. It's the heavens, the sky. It's a direct reference to, when you look up, that's the sky, and they called it heaven. And we have this extra meaning on it when that's not what it was originally. It was just simply a place that people go to look. You know, it wasn't a go-to, you go there. It was just a place. And so Enoch's actually taken from the earth by the gods in spaceships, and he's never returned. He leaves at 365 years. And I just think for anyone interested, if you want to go down that road, not only is the Book of Enoch interesting, but the fact that he is taken by God from the earth, I think is really, really, really fascinating. And so I do think that you should just go ahead and just check it out. And so now getting back to the overall subject, I think that what you should do is consider, what is it that, what are we doing with a Bible that has Methuselah, Jared, Enoch, Adam, including people like, of course, Noah. They live various ages: 400 years, 700 years, 600 years, 300.
Shem 600.
Yep. And then
Lamech 777 years old.
Yep. And what's interesting is that what fascinated me was they're really talking years. And then for a while they said, well, you know, they don't know what they're talking about. They're talking about dog years. Or, well, they didn't say dog years. They said moon cycles. And it's like, okay. So the Sumerians had worked out pi in ziggurats. They had worked out the Pythagorean theorem based on the Babylonian Plimpton tablet, which you and I have already talked about, even I think on this show. And then there is other hexagonal, hexamal 60-based math that is basically spherical geometry. In a nutshell, these people were dealing with very complex equations 700 years before Pythagoras was ever going to come to the Pythagorean theorem. And these are in cuneiform tablets in Sumeria, yet they don't know what years are. And the ancients were so much more adept at what we consider, again, we picture them, we have these constant museum portrayals of loincloth slaves, getting whipped up a ramp and heaving a big block into place somewhere. And the reality is that that's something that we are contemporary with. That's something that we can only imagine that's how they were building. But in reality, I think they knew what years were. I think they knew what cycles were. And so we have three interesting examples. When we think Bible, this is us putting on a very Western cap. And I've talked about this barrier between the West and the East. So we have this Western cap of, well, everything's really true about the Bible because, well, we have we know Western science and we invented everything important and everything was out of Africa And everything based for out of Africa is based on what we know of genetics and what we know of Neanderthal, Denisovan, and mystery human. There's like currently even mainstream biology says there's a mystery 14% genealogy that I think currently is the number, but it's going to change. So let's just take it at that. So we have this idea that, okay, well, the Bible, Eden is somewhere in Africa. There's an out of Africa theory. So we have non-Christian believers and just scientists saying, okay, well, everything's out of Africa, so everything's Western. And it's very important that we consider that. But then we have the ancient Egyptians telling Solon, who ultimately gets told also about the Atlanteans and gets ultimately all that goes to Plato. And we say, well, Plato said all this stuff about Atlantis, but in reality it was from Solon. And Solon was in Egypt with the ancient Egyptian priests, and they said, well, we have 38,000 years. We have a king's list that's 36,000 years old, and it goes all the way back to this god. And the Sumerians, so we have biblical Hebrew history saying, okay, well, here's Methuselah at 1,000, and here's Shep and Noah and Jared and all these, and Enoch and all these different biblical figures. And what we have is they start at 1,000, they kind of decrement down to like what we consider normal lifespans. And then we have this Egyptian kings list, which it's getting more and more talked about. There's a spotlight that's been on it for about a decade or so now that's showing, look, the Egyptians account for 36,000 years of their own history. And then we have the Sumerians, which are older. And what do we get from them? Well, we get the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we get the story of the Anunnaki, and which is their gods. And I will touch very slightly on Nibiru. We're not talking about it tonight, but Sitchin was wrong. There was, not that he was wrong, there is no cuneiform tablets that back up his perspective on the Anunnaki. But what's important about the Sumerians is that their creation story, because the biblical story comes after that. In Western world, we consider the Sumerians having the oldest creation stories, the oldest religion. And Gilgamesh goes from the Sumerian histories into the Bible. And so that's just something to put on your write down of, for those who are self-exploring and self-experimenting. Go look up what happened to Gilgamesh, and why is Gilgamesh in all of his adventures. Gilgamesh is in, again, the Old Testament, and he's in like, they just couldn't give him up. I mean, the stories were so good. They tweaked the creation story for the Old Testament. They made it their own. They made the Noah story, but there's the same one. So here we have the Sumerians, and they too have a king's list, and not only creation list, but a king's list. And this king's list is not a single list. It's a list that is found in different areas of Sumer. So when we say Sumerians, we mean Sumer. And they have a king's list where they have a delineation line that says pre-flood, post-flood, pre-diluvian, post-diluvian. They actually say it in the list. And the pre-diluvian king's list, which I write about in my book, and you get into the details, it's pretty simple. You have 8 kings ruling for between 246 to 267,000 years, depending on how you read it. Well, what's interesting about that is that you have them, again, it was tried to be explained away that, well, it was allegory, it was a story that these kings, they didn't really live for 32 to 36,000 years each. And then again, they have the list that says post-flood kings. So we're talking, Younger Dryas, we're talking between 11.5 and 13,000 years ago. We have what's called the Younger Dryas. And so now we have post-flood kings in the Sumerian kings list. And just like the Bible, because the Bible really borrowed quite frequently from Sumer. So what we have is one can spend a lot of time deciding whether or not the stories from the Bible are really just the Sumerian stories, and they carried them over and created their own religion and their own faith system, and that was something that happened later. But when we look at the Sumerian post-flood kings, they have a similar issue with what's going on with Methuselah and Jared and Enoch and Adam and Noah and etc. What's happened is as you move in to the post-flood period, we have, and we are going somewhere with this, folks, but what happens is that, again, the king's years decrement, but not completely. What's different about the Sumerian kings list is some seem to live a lot longer and some seem to live a lot less. And what happens is we have a more extensive list, but one has to wonder whether or not, as we still translate millions of untranslatable cuneiform tablets, whether or not there is some more, maybe greater accuracy in the Sumer lists. Because although they're listing kings, what's the sliver of common truth? So one, there's a rabbit hole of, well, did the Bible really just take their list and create new stories? And within that allegory, they, Noah and Moses and, Jared and Methuselah, they're all different people and they have different stories. But what they kept was the ages and how they decrement down. So maybe that's one thing you could take from it. But then we look at the Sumerian kings list, and that's about kings ruling. And their kings, they decrement in their ages. We're going from tens of thousands of years to thousands of years to 1,000 years down to kings getting maybe murdered or dying off in 60 years. And so what's happened is maybe the sliver of truth that we can take from this story, not completely excluding Hindu Vedas and Eastern religions, which accounts for over half of the world population in belief system. So we're hearing this as English-speaking people, but the reality is that there are many, many people around the world, billions of people that do not believe in Christianity. And they've been believing in the Hindu Vedas, and they've been written far longer than what we know of the Bible, which is just for note. And for now, what we're looking at is this: what if we know that there was a massive unspoken about prehistory that had an advanced society that could build with giant 1,000-ton stones and account for earthquakes? What were their other technologies? And what we're talking about tonight is age. And age is important because the sliver of truth, whether it's the Bible you want to reference or Sumer, and we can get into the Hindu Vedas, but what we know from the Sumerian kings list is that we have rulers, and they're almost called gods, but the rulers, the kings, were ruling for tens of thousands of years. So is it possible that, based on what we can find in evidence in the ground, is it possible and more realistic that a society that could not only control and manage energies and frequencies and waves of earthquakes in their constructions, were they also using technologies that managed their age through tuning of what we now currently, in the particularly last 40 years, we call vibrational medicine? Because the best description I've heard of how to describe a human being or organic or the very chairs we're all sitting in or listening or checking out this show through is frozen light. And that's Dr. Gerber from the Book of Vibrational Medicine. I think that's a great description, isn't it?
Yeah, I like that. Frozen light.
Yeah, because we're energy-based. This isn't a woo-woo conversation. We are literally energy-based beings. Yeah, we're frozen light. We're frozen energy. This organic matter is really just really thick for the graphic, coagulated light. How's that for graphic? But
that's good. With what you just said, and the examples of building the pyramids, the 51-degree angles, precisely, the corners are precisely pointing to each cardinal point. There was a lot of science involved by these ancient people. But the time keeping seems like it should. You're kind of joking about the dog years. I don't know how they could be so precise in engineering, but really off with not noticing the seasons changing. They seem too smart to miss the observations that Orion's back. Okay, it was here. It's another year later. Or you really have to wonder how much of a thorough knowledge of science, just say the Egyptians had, and and you have to apply that to their timekeeping of. I actually misspoke by saying Enoch was closer to 1,000, but just say Methuselah being well over 900 years old.
Yeah, there's no way. You can't take people, you can't have it both ways. You can't, whether you want to go into the conspiracy world and say it seems like a cover-up and there's so many examples because it's just blatant. At the same time, you can't look at a society that's building these ziggurats and they're clearly based on really complex math. Right. And then say, okay, well, they don't know what a year is. They didn't say seasons. They weren't implying moons. They weren't implying summer solstices. They said years. And they knew what a year was. And it's very insulting to say otherwise.
No, I'm agreeing with you. Maybe what is what's in the Sumerian texts or Bible, maybe that's actually really accurate.
As far
I just don't know. I don't know how to explain that, other than maybe they were right.
Yeah, there's no way that you're going to look at the ages and so there's a couple reasons. Okay, so for everybody who this seems like an obvious point, but let's get to the heart of the matter of actually looking at our true history versus what we're told by Victorian researchers who didn't want women to vote for one of the many reasons. That if we stuck with technology that invented the first phone, we wouldn't have cell phones. The reality is that it's only and again, it's not the facts. There is a Victorian age theory of evolution and history, a Victorian age history that has not been updated, despite, Göbekli Tepe. When I started doing research 4 years ago in a very raw way, it took me almost 4 years to build my book, and it was a lot of effort. It wasn't procrastination. For all those being funny out there, the thing that was one of the things that became very interesting to me is not having any data biases. The first time I read about Klaus Schmidt, he's of course still alive. He hasn't died yet. And he had been working on Göbekli Tepe for 44 years, and something that I feel has been a Mandela effect for me. And I am now a great proponent of screenshotting anything you find that you think is interesting. If you think it's going to be there in 1 day, 1 hour, or 2 years, don't do it. If you find something interesting on the internet, take a screenshot, please. Because one of the things about Göbekli Tepe right away was organic matter research that had been tested and found to be 36,000 years old. Now, that organic matter was found in situ within Göbekli Tepe, which has only been dug up to 5% of a site that to this day has only 5% dug up. There are 6 total tepes that they know of. So 6 different city locations. And of those, I remember doing the research early on in my book writing that said this site is at least 12 or 16,000 years old and could be 36,000 years old. And now, Mark, I cannot find any references to those carbon date testing. I have, however, been able to talk to some other researchers and some other authors. Jim Willis, I am doing the Forbidden Knowledge News Conference first weekend in April. Jim Willis and I are speaking on Saturday. I'm speaking also on Friday, but Jim Willis has written 13 books, and he is leading a group to Göbekli Tepe for Andrew Collins. And he's taking a group to Göbekli Tepe, and he was talking about the restrictions that Andrew Collins almost got banned from going to Göbekli Tepe. And so this is a site that has huge megalithic pillars. The site was clearly either buried or nefariously hung up, it has multiple years of occupation by different cultures. But I got told by Jim via Andrew that they are not supposed to speak on site with the tour group about Göbekli Tepe having maybe roofs, or that the columns were part of housing structures or buildings, or that they're older than 12,000 years. And I bring this up because we have this weighted 150-year-old Victorian timeline that is just crushing to any new insight, and also into a more realistic, not just timeline, but the sciences, which gets us back soon now to the longevities of ages. So here we are with Göbekli Tepe that they're saying, well, it's around 12,000 years old. And I'm like, hold on. 4 years ago, it was 12 to 16,000 to 36,000 years old, and it could be even older, to it was 12 to 16,000. And then I noticed over the last year, particularly around this last year, that suddenly everyone's happy to say it's around 12,000 years old. And I'm like, what Mandela effect is going on right now? Have you heard that? Have you noticed the timeline change?
No, but I've heard some of the similar extreme antiquity dates of from the Bosnian Pyramid and Gunung Padang.
Oh yeah, those are that site. That's 23,000 or plus years old, and that was found by a geologist. And I write about that quick in the book too, just to give people a scope that there's a lot going on 15 to 36,000 years ago. This lines up with the Egyptian kings list. This starts to line up more with the Sumerian kings list. So if we were to say that there's some bogus lists in the middle, but to give the Egyptians and the Sumer lists more credence, we have a city that, we talked about it quick, is that there's a city off the west coast of Cuba that is at 2,300 feet, about 1,700 meters. That city would have to have been above water, irrelevant to tectonic plate shifting. That city could not have been above water less than 50-ish, 55,000 years ago. So we're all excited about talking about the Younger Dryas and what we're calling the biblical flood, the flood that flooded the earth, and that there was some sort of worldwide event. And I think that's true, that there is something that happened somewhere between 11,500 and 13,000 years ago. We know that from North America. We know that from a number of things being wiped out here. That's all fun and dandy. What we should focus on, though, is that there was something else that happened worldwide in that 55, somewhere between 50 and 60,000 years ago. That city off the coast of Cuba, which is polygonal, it's pyramidal. It's built very similar to the constructions around the rest of the world. And something I've not talked about before, and this will be the first time I've actually mentioned this on air, because I want to keep sharing
for Nightlight.
Yeah, for Nightlight.
Thank
exclusive.
You.
Here it is. So this is not something you are welcome. So here's what it is. Scott Walter on America Unearthed was doing a number of different of the episodes of America Unearthed. A couple of the episodes have covered, of course, the origins of the Aztecs and the Mayans, like Maya blue, that the color came from Georgia, and that the capital looks like it could be New Mexico or Utah, the Salt Lake, and that there's also a mysterious issue of corn, which can only be made by the management of humans, and there's no random corn. The corn that we get, and one of the engineered strains of it in Wisconsin is about 9,000 years old, which means people had to have been in Wisconsin and managing corn for 9,000 years at a minimum. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because one of the things I've theorized in my book is that primitive cultures, just like today, we can run into a high technology store or department store and buy crazy technology or cool cars, but yet there's 155, give or take, tribes estimated around the planet that live in nomadic, simple, what we would call primitive. They're in loincloths. They live in jungles. They live in deserts. They live in Arctic regions like Eskimos. There are tribes, indigenous peoples around the world that live like they lived 50, 80, a million years ago. They are living as they were, which is also, just side note, why I brought up the Victorian history, is that we're talking about a past that we say, okay, we are now the most advanced we've ever been. Well, that seems to not be true. Solon, the Greek, got told by the Egyptians that you are young now, but you are very old and you are very ancient and you are very advanced peoples, and you're not anymore. And they told the story of Atlantis. And then we have these weird slivers of truths, whether it is the Bible or the Egyptian Kings List or it's the Sumerian Kings List, where you have rulers ruling for tens of thousands or hundreds of years. We have people living for these crazy amount of times, and then of course there's all the giant stories and the dwarf-sized people. So we have all these different stories: the Moon-eyed people, the Cherokee Moon-eyed people. There's a million different stories around the world, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Ireland, you name it. But what we have are, if we just wash away the Victorian stuff and say, okay, what are the facts on the table as we play this archaeological adult version of Clue? What do we have? Well, we have really long ages. We have currently we know that people can live over 100 years, but we also have these strange things within our. We have okay. So I won't get into the genetic story yet, but we have the placebo effect. I'm just going to throw the placebo effect out there. Just keep that in mind. And then we have these people living for hundreds or thousands of years, living indefinitely, or for thousands of years, and we have it in multiple cultures, even into the East, into the Hindu Vedas. And then now we have a society, not during the Younger Dryas or the Biblical Flood, but about 50 to 60,000 years ago. Well, we have the Egyptian Kings List tapering off about 36,000 years ago. We have mainstream academia already, right now, it won't take you long to look it up online, but they say that Denisovan, Neanderthal, and a mystery 13 to 14% human. And mind you, I think that what they're saying is, of the genomes they've tested, they've never tested every bone on Earth. They don't have a full paleoanthropological history of the planet. We still, to this day, discover 3,500 to 5,000 new living entities a year. And we've been doing that for 40 years. And that's per Michael Cremo and Forbidden Archaeology. The reality is that the human race has been discovered. We just discovered creatures that live without oxygen near lava openings. I mean, the reality is we don't even know everything that is living on the planet, let alone what's lived on the planet, let alone the complete human record. But what's important about this is that, again, what mainstream academia is saying is about 50,000 years ago, Denisovan, Neanderthal, and a mystery group of humans bred into our population. And what I'm building to is this, is that although the Younger Dryas is a very important period, that 50 to 60,000 years ago, an unknown, unnamed, yet to be coined, can't do it yet on your show, disaster happened where, and yes, there was a volcanic event that Brad Olson and I and Michael in Conflict, we were co-hosting and talking about just the other night about 75,000 years ago, there was a volcanic event. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a worldwide event somewhere between 55 and 60,000 years ago that really ended what I think was a global, polygonal, blocked, cymatic, fully tuned, terraformed, soil-engineered Earth, where there was one group of humans across the whole planet. But at the same time, just like now, maybe there was 200 or 300 tribes that were still left alone. And here we are with the new info that I haven't shared anywhere on the planet, a new perspective, a new theory, which is the Aztecs and their location coming from the Salt Lake region of Utah, or that they were coming from New Mexico, or possibly they were in the Wisconsin area, that those areas had been occupied by post-Diluvian, at least in the last 12,000 years, they were occupied by those people that then made their way, as they think, the Mayans, they made their way south, that they came from North America because the more advanced humans, which used polygonal construction, we know that, they used cymatic polygonal blocks, so cymatic meaning vibrational frequency orientated blocks, cancel or mute earthquakes, but they could also transfer energies. They always worked with granite, limestone, and basalt, something to those effects. And Yusuf Aoun of Egypt, the tour guide / Christopher Dunn, Ben from Uncharted X, there's a million people, Brian Forster, that have all worked with Yusuf and Mohammed Ibrahim. They are all those Egyptologists, those Egyptians, and he's a multi-generation stonemason, but he has a great video on the electrocurrent transfer and use of basalt, limestone, and granite, and it's very fascinating to watch. So there's something to this ancient human society that we don't understand yet. But what happened is something happened 55 to 60,000 years ago, whether it's the Giza Plateau and the pyramids there, or the pyramids all through Central and South America. What happened is they got obliterated one way or the other. And I think that the reason there's always been benevolent, I think at some time there's always been a benevolent society that has left these other tribes alone for whatever reason through the millions, not hundreds of thousands, but the millions of years of human history. That's not an opinion. That's just the in situ finding from the Red Crag, from the Mediterranean to Table Mountain. There is established paleoanthropological evidence of humans being here for millions of years. So what we have is an unknown human timeline that includes two kinds of, Denisovan, Neanderthal. When you think Neanderthal, you always think of a caveman, but they were taller, they were bigger, they had a larger brain, and yet they're always described as a subhuman species. I want to start getting people to distinguish between Victorian theories and facts. The facts are, again, we don't have a correct and complete paleoanthropological record of the human race. Fact, we know that Denisovan and Neanderthal and a mystery group of humans all bred together about 50-something thousand years ago. And I think that's because it was post a disaster that was maybe hundreds or thousands of years right before it. So somewhere up to that 60,000 mark, everything kind of went to crap. But what do we have in there? We have this king's list. So they remembered, one of the things to get in your mind is that the king's list on one level can represent from Sumer that they understood that people lived a long, long period of time. And that too, there was a longer generational history to the human history, which is important because at the same time, we have an origin story for the Aztecs and the Mayans of more of North America, which may have been true because when we look geologically, there are a couple super volcanoes, like Yellowstone is located in America, and that's a 60-mile diameter super volcano. That volcano could go off, it's allegedly, my numbers that I was told were 320 to 360,000 years, and we're kind of due for that thing to go off. There may be areas around the planet that the super society that could build and create 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 ton blocked cities and move mountains literally, and to engineer the soil and the plants and tune the frequencies of the very ionosphere of the planet, which may have led to the longevity of our human race. That society may have left certain areas around the planet where they're like, we may be able to do a advanced pressure relief valve, but there are areas we'll just stay away from. And there may have been human societies that they left alone. So just like now, that there are like the Singalis on their island that recently, 3 years ago, killed a missionary for trying to go there. I mean, Marco Polo even said, don't go to that island, literally said, stay away from these people. But we have these tribes all over. And so why wouldn't an advanced society in the past leave them alone also? So what happens is a worldwide society goes through a massive disaster, and at the end of it, you have obliterated pyramids and constructions, which we see all the rebuilds in Egypt, and we see all the rebuilds in Teotihuacan and all over Mexico and all over Central America, and we have the Guatemalan LiDAR scan. So what we have is we have tribal people know so many natural medicines, and they may not live thousands of years, but they knew how to take care of themselves, and they survive, and they take over, adapt, and repair and own these old constructions, because you don't. I'm a builder. I've done 20 years of historical remodeling, and I've done major structural adjustments and additions, and I've mutated the shapes dramatically of buildings. And you don't start a pyramid. So like at Teotihuacan, what doesn't get talked about frequently are the large megalithic ruins. So all throughout Central and South America are megalithic ruins. And why is that important? It's because no one builds with a giant like 300, 400, 800-ton block and then switches to mud brick. Nobody does that. You don't carve 4 steps and then go, let's give up. Let's do mud brick. And then, wait, let's use this megalithic block again. It's clear whether it's Ollantay Tambo, Sacsayhuaman, Tiwanaku, Cusco, Coricancha, pick whether, we talk about the Giza Plateau and all the different ruins, all the way to Cambodia and Angkor Wat, but underwater, like off the coast of Cuba, the Bimini Road. There are so many places, Doggerland in Europe. Those are just some of the many places. Yeah.
Dwarka.
Right. Yeah. Those more, there's the only one that's the most sketchy, and I had a hard time geologically deciding if I really couldn't decide if it really existed, like with all the tectonic plate shifting. So like on one hand, the Recot structure, the Eye of Africa, is possibly, I think Jimmy from Bright Insight did a really brilliant documentary on the Eye of Africa being Plato's Atlantis. It has saltwater evidences, but it has the mountains. It has everything in the correct location. Anyway, people should check that out, but what's important is that it's 7,800 feet above water. At the meantime, Lake Titicaca is at almost 13,000 feet, yet it's a massive lake with salt water and seahorses. Now, I don't put it past an ancient society that can literally move mountains to salt the lake and add seahorses. Like, it's possible that it's manufactured, but it's also possible that that city off the coast of Cuba, had it been above, other things could have been below, and the Eye of Africa could have been at sea level, because that's what it really indicates and looks like. And 7,800 feet is a lot closer to 13,000 feet at Lake Titicaca in South America. So is it possible that through the shifting of some violent event, that everything ended up where it did in a particular time frame? I absolutely think that that's possible. Scientifically, there are too many common locations that have that kind of a shifting of a rise in height and a fall. So tectonically, again, plate tectonics, remember, is a theory. I'm a huge fan. I did it. I was a nerd. I will out myself. I definitely went to the district science fair with the Earthquake Project, and I won. And I won all 3 years. But I'm just, it's really fun, the idea of plates, that Pangea, that everything was connected. It appears that everything broke off and moved out over hundreds of millions of years. We have a 4.5 to 7 billion year old planet that
like Loch Ness, like the Loch Ness should actually be part of Canada or North America, is somewhere in North America. That's part of the theory too.
Uh, well, yeah, and it's so fun to look at this with everyone because I think everyone out there listening, and I've been saying this more recently, and I really want to encourage everyone listening, that you are all self-experimenters. You are not passive listeners. Everyone out there listening has a mind of their own, and there is, and I know we're not going over it tonight. There's too much in the book, and there's too much just in general. It's not about the book, but of course, please be interested in the book and, follow me, et cetera, et cetera. But the
It's a great
what's
read.
important is, yeah, thank you. What's important is the self-experimentation. We all have a shared genetic memory. We all have collective human consciousness. That's a real science. It's a real thing. We are vibrational creatures. We are magnetic and electromagnetic. We are we're not physical beings. We have an aurora, and this ties into that vibrational medicine. This is not a theory. This is a real thing. They've been doing work on this. Burr in the 1940s had done research on the taking an image of whether it was a unsprouted seed. Sprouting a seed, by the way, people, is when you give it water, it unpacks itself exactly like, for those nerds out there, a zip file. When you have a large file and you can mathematically reduce it and make it smaller so you can ship it and then unpack it and you still have the image. That's exactly what a seed is. What people don't realize is that when you eat, this goes into paleo, which is also in the book, and it's about how do we positively do gene expression, how do we reactivate what we're calling superhuman abilities, and how do we live longer, but not just longer, but how do we live more connected back to this, what seems like a giant advanced computer that's in safe mode, which is the earth and us. How do we do that? And part of it is how we eat, and part of what we eat are seeds, and there are sprouted seeds and unsprouted seeds. And unsprouted seeds are just super zipped up, packed up vitamins and minerals that we need. But when they're packed, you don't get any of the you don't get any of the positives. You just get the salt, you get the protein, you get some healthy fat. But when you sprout a seed, what you're telling the seed to do is to grow into what it's supposed to be. And this goes into vibrational medicine, back to Burr. So here he is in 1940, and he's measuring the image of what is the seed, the unpacked, just dead seed. What is it showing magnetically under measurements? And what is this? And then he started experimenting right away with salamanders, because there's a lot of genetic reasons to do it. But what they found was in measuring whether it was an egg or whether it was a seed, what they found was that the adult salamander and the adult plant was shown magnetically fully grown. And later, there's a technology called Carillion photography. And what you might, for those of you who are familiar to a point, you might realize that it's, oh yeah, Carillion photography is where you take an aurora image of the electromagnetic field around, whether it's a human, a plant, an animal, they all have a Carillion, an aurora. And that ties into some other theories which we just talked about collective human consciousness, the idea that not all the information or your soul is stored within your body itself, that it is literally within not only a collective downloadable collective consciousness, where I've talked before about maybe that collective consciousness is a way that we store all of what we are in our memories, and that we're always backed up by each other, and that the reason we're more advanced now than when Leonardo da Vinci was inventing things is because we have more RAM, we have more computing capacity. So for those of you out there who think there should be 30 or 40% less people on the planet, I want to remind everyone that the collective human consciousness, it's not just idea after idea inventing on itself by 10 or 20 or 100 people or even 1,000. I'm telling you that the 8 billion people on the planet don't represent our original human population, that it was much larger based on engineered soil and based on the fact that if you take 8 billion people right now, and I got to credit Michael Tellinger with this, if you take all the people on the planet now and round it up to 8 billion, give them an acre, they could basically fit in 2 states the size of Texas. But that's not a lot of people, really. But the collective human consciousness has allowed for advancements in nanotechnology, switching, spintronics, which means quantum computing, and then also the ability to back each other up like a zip file. And so these experiments that have been really going on in the last 80 years have included things like Burr going, well, it appears that the very structure of whether it's a seed or an egg, that it shows the fully grown adult. And in Carillion photography, what it's doing is it's taking an aurora image of a living entity, and now there's different ways to do it. Not all Carillion photography is created equal, but I want to stick with this idea of longevity, of living for thousands of years. And what does it indicate? And what they found through Carillion photography and researchers is that there's something called the phantom leaf experiment, where if you cut a third of a leaf off, like just razor cut off a third of a leaf, if you take a Carillion photo, the aurora, the very image of the missing section of the leaf shows up, just like when you have a phantom limb when you've had an amputation. And what's interesting about this is that there was an orthopedic surgeon out of New York who has developed technology, and some people might even be listening that are beneficiaries of this, but the technology was first applied to horses and animals and experimentally to regrow bone from extreme fractures and damage where it would otherwise have required an amputation. And what they found was that they could stimulate the currents of the bone, of the cellular level at the bone, to regrow and regenerate correctly. And it was later, first it was applied internally within the bone, through surgical implants. Then eventually it was found that they could do it just in the cast at night while you're sleeping. And one of the experiments was to take salamanders, which have the we're calling it, again, it's the theory of evolution. Remember that, folks, it's a theory. And what that means is simply that our universe and our planet is much more complex than we think. So don't jump to any other conclusions, just that salamanders can regrow limbs that are cut off. In fact, you will love to hear about a snail that the Japanese have been studying. This is the last article I read was from Daily Mail. This is a snail that that decapitates itself, literally cuts off its own head, and the head regrows a body over the course of a month and a half.
Wow.
It literally, Mark, it doesn't have a heart for almost 3 weeks. This is something that we're like, there are sharks, by the way, that live in the Baltic that can live over 400 years. And we think, oh, that's an evolutionary principle. Well, here's what's going to blow everybody. Okay, that should be mind-blowing. I just talked about a decapitated snail and 400-plus-year-old sharks, and that doesn't blow your mind, so here's what will. This orthopedic surgeon out of New York started experimenting with the salamanders, and they would surgically remove a limb, and then it would grow a new one. But while they watched, they also did some instrumental measurements, and they found that there was a negative charge to the the cells that were doing what ultimately counts to piezoelectric electronic switching, basically computing, basically like a robot of computations. What they figured out was there was a specific negative going on at the point of the limb where it was regrowing. So they experimented with frogs. And what they did was they surgically removed the frog's leg, and they gave it the same negative current that the salamander, well, in essence, the same negative current. And the frog, despite evolutionary developing the point where it doesn't regrow limbs, was regrowing a limb. And how does this tie into the phantom leaf experiment and this idea of Carillion photography of the aurora, the esoteric, the etheric body, the vibrational universe, and what we are as an entity? What they found, and there's a number of researchers, and I know we have a limited amount of time, but what we're talking about is, oh, awesome. So we're talking about showing the phantom leaf experiment showed that the leaf itself knew that it showed basically the outline of what the leaf should grow into, which is really part of a tree, and we'll digress on that in a minute. But for now, what we're talking about is the very current, negative or positive, and they also found around disease fighting. Carillion photography has been used for cancer identification and some other diseases. There's ongoing experimentation with it, just like CAT scans, MRIs, you name it. And again, there's a lot to unpack there, but I just want to stick with the image for everyone out there that there's there's a concept that we've lost where that we pick it up in the idea of the placebo effect, where we have a conscious image of our health, a conscious power within us that isn't a random accident. It's not just a maybe. There seems to be a very significant design element around you determining what a healthy you looks like versus a sick you. And I would like to throw it out there to, the big conspiracy would be to say, hey, pharmaceutical companies aren't going to get anything out of this. And I actually want to throw it out there that they've been so terrified. Their business model has been on, well, we need to make people sick. I've literally had multiple doctors. One of the things I love about doing what I've been doing is that I know so many medical professionals, and I mean doctors, surgeons, nurses, and a significant amount of them, and literally out of their mouths, our business is about the hospitals seem to be set up, and the educational system seems to be set up to get people sick, keep them sick. Treatment is where the money is, not the cure. And I want to throw it out there to anyone listening within the system, the gray state. Instead of worrying about being the enemy, I want you to consider that there's more money in preventative health and in keeping people healthy than there is in treating them when they're sick. That's a paradigm that, again, my problem is that I think that we're all operating at 10 to 15% brain capacity. We're in safe mode. We're not operating where we were when we lived tens of thousands or indefinite amounts of years, and we'll get back to the longevity of man and what we could get back to, and superhumans like Wim Hof and Stig Severinsen, and people who practice like the Wim Hof. We'll get back to that. But for now, I think people who are in the gray state or within that organizations, really start looking at more that the collective human consciousness, when it was Leonardo da Vinci's time, came up with corkscrew wood helicopters that would never work. But when we re-achieved collective human consciousness through the billions of what, gosh knows what the actual qubits of information are available to the total collective third eye of the human consciousness, and I don't mean the individual calcified pineal gland. I mean the total collective human consciousness at 8 billion people. When there are people out there who think there should be half a billion people on the planet total, or that there should be 33% less of the population, I want you to make a different effort to consider that collective human consciousness is what's causing, whether it is an individual or not, to break through some of the barriers we've had in our collective amnesia and our sleep to make spintronics and quantum computing possible, to make some of these leaps back into where we could be possible. And that not only is it externally technically possible, I think second sight and other abilities that are considered what we call paranormal really all tie into what is an ancient human lost technologies, which include cellular switching. And what we're finding is the more we learn about the human body, and not just regrowing limbs and cellular repair. I talk about Johnny Chong, about Qigong. It's an Eastern medicine. It manifests differently, but for Johnny, he could start paper on fire. He could direct the electrical current in his body. He healed people in a lot of different ways. There was a documentary crew. There's been a book written about him. I talk about it in my book. Important was that ultimately one of the scientific papers that was looking at, very detailed, looking at what's going on at the mitochondrial level of DNA. And it's basically nuclear cold fusion. And then here in the realm of vibrational medicine, by the way, is kind of the capstone on what some people might think of as herbal medicine or homeopathic medicine. This is all under the single umbrella of vibrational medicine. That's really the bigger subject. But what we have are these different instances and pieces of it that all come back to a half a dozen or more TED Talks by really brilliant people about doctors explaining the placebo effect. And all of it goes back to Why is it that we're describing nuclear cold fusion, vibrational medicine within the cellular structure as piezoelectric cellular switching, and then the direct description used with all of it is, well, it's a lot like a computer. It's a lot like it's some sort of a machine. And I think as we've gone from not knowing there was a double helix in the DNA to a quad helix to these nuclear cold fusion and piezoelectric switching properties of cellular mechanisms, and again, what we're calling the placebo effect. These are all we're describing things, and we go, well, this is like technology. This is like some sort of a robot or a computer. Well, we are so detached. We look at a tree, a plant, a flower, even dirt. And for everyone who hasn't heard before, my big thing into the market here is terra preta, which is an ancient engineered soil. It's in northern Africa. It's all over South America. It's at least has an area in Brazil the size of 2 Spains or a couple Great Britons. And it is soil that can be up to 20 feet thick, and it has piezoelectric properties, and I don't think that has to do with growing. I think it has to do with communications and a connected terraform planet. And it's in Australia, so it's Australia, Central America, and then I found as I looked, it's in Siberia to North America. And so we have this engineered soil, and then we have polygonal constructions, and all of it, of course, not handling it tonight, but it's all about a larger connected humanity and planet with the plants and animals itself. So another biblical story in reference to living for thousands of years, we automatically think that what we eat is grown in the soil. The reality is that if you had a aurora that had to just be tuned to a particular frequency, just like Anthony Holland, who is a professor who I talk about in my book, had picked up Royal Rife's work and killed MRSA, leukemia, a number of other bacteria and viruses, and I mean by the dozens. And this should be news every year, and he gave a huge TED Talk. It's available. You can watch on video as you can see cancer being destroyed by sound waves. Imagine a society that just simply had to stand within the correct vibrational frequency range and have the very cancer in them just eliminated, and or the not correctly operating cells eliminated. We take it for granted that every cell in the body is replaced. There's varying numbers I've heard now. I'll just tell you that within 6 months to a year, you've been entirely replaced as a human being. So you have to think about this, that the very person that you meet and hang out with and you don't see for a year is literally not the same person a year later. How does
freaky.
That? Isn't it? Like your soul. What
Yep.
makes your soul then? If you're entirely replaced, every cell in your body, well, why do they grow old? Why grow old? You know, the SENS Institute has been working on that. Isn't that odd?
Mm-hmm.
And this is... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. Oh no.
No.
And I did want to just buttress your information about the vibrational healing Oral Rife's research into cancer. Is when Maria Wheatley's been a guest with us, she's talked about the vibrational archaeoacoustics at Stonehenge, and you do have some of the skeletons that were found, like the Amesbury archer, who he was determined that he was from like Germany, Switzerland, or he had a club foot or something like that. obviously it's going to be a painful walk, hundreds of miles, and eventually somehow getting across the channel. But Maria has discussed the vibrations at Stonehenge and other megalithic sites, and she's explained that her theory is that maybe a lot of these places these megalithic sites were hospitals, healing centers.
I love that you bring that up, because one of the things I had talked about early on is the Greek amphitheater. And in my book, I referenced there's some brilliant scientists in literally for the last few years. These people should be championed way more. There's a series of scientists that I bring up their papers in my book that are talking about how it made ancient origins news right before my book was released. So that was about, I think it was April of 2020. So it was 2021 or so. No, it was April of 2019. So they said, we can't help but notice that the structural pylons of the Greek and Roman amphitheaters closely resemble seismic metamaterials that mute earthquakes. And they said it in quotes because there's a lot of theories that the Greeks and the Romans inherited, not that they weren't brilliant architects or sculptors or artists, but that they inherited a lot of what they used to build their society, just like the dynastic Egyptians, that whatever happened to that world 55, 60,000 years ago, it kind of fell into chaos after whatever disaster happened, and then we got hit again with the Younger Dryas, and then whether it was the same people or new ones, they came in and they readapted it for their use. And what happened was, you have the Greek amphitheaters where they'll have someone stand down on the stage and they'll say, these amphitheaters were built so well. You can hear a dollar bill crinkle, and they'll crinkle a dollar bill, so you can sit anywhere in this Greek amphitheater and hear the acoustics, right? And it's like crazy, right?
Yeah.
So
and they're the engineering with just throwing out a sample like the amphitheaters, there is just so much there built into the engineering that it is just astonishing today, and we're just rediscovering that.
Yeah, and so this ties into what you're saying about, imagine a society where, whether it's the pyramids, like Christopher Dunn's theory of the Giza power plants and pyramids across the planet, there is something to the water, a global, low vibrational, totally ionized, frequency managed planet with, by the way, not random forests. I talk about this in the book, like the meta-sequoia, the granddads, meta-sequoia, the granddads of sequoia. And we don't actually have an origin for sequoia, by the way. It's so interesting, but that's, again, besides the point. These scientists that were looking at seismic metamaterials are the studies of whether it's a nano-sized object to a large object, things that would mute or cancel earthquakes. But we have giant stone spheres all over the earth. We have giant polygonal construction, and we have these oddly amplified Greek amphitheaters. And from the air, one of the theories that has been around forever now in alternative history is, why is it that all these buildings look like giant circuit grids? Why does Teotihuacan look like a giant basic circuit? And why is the Nazca line?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen
go
that.
Ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just agreeing with you that the overhead shots that being given a lot of attention, and people are doing it more and more with their own drones. It's an entirely new perspective, and you get the like motherboard configurations, and like what you're saying. Okay, go, Maya. I was just agreeing with you.
No, I totally agree with you. No,
Jared.
keep going. I'm good. No, it's, hey, I can shut up once in a while. Watch me take a
No,
breath.
but
Um,
well, in a little bit, and we talk about America's Stonehenge and the all the drones and LiDAR being used up there. That's been given or been giving Dennis new perspectives on the site. You can talk about and we can talk about that in your upcoming presentation there.
yeah, the and where I was going with the Greek amphitheaters is that we've been thinking, okay, well, if they inherited, and this is why it's important to get away from these Victorian theories of our origin, our history, our Western philosophy. There's no Western or Eastern philosophy. It's all, what is human history? Why is there a global pyramid network, global pyramid?
There's like a one
similar,
world.
Right. And it's not, I mean, by God, we were more easily able to come up with the 100th monkey theory, and it was more easily acceptable to think that there was a collective human consciousness, and everybody just kind of scratched their head at the same time and decided, you know what, it's the age of not the Aquarius. Let's all build pyramids. They actually come up with the 100th monkey theory to explain it, that none of the continents were connected, that everybody just decided it's time to make blue jeans. They didn't just come from America. They just, everybody made blue jeans.
And you get the same same standard unit of measurement all around the world about the same time, but they're the oceans.
Yeah, there you go.
So how do you? But people are probably pretty sharp enough to do this naval engineering to get the ideas from point A through the ocean over to point B, and I think people are traveling a lot more than what we give them credit for.
Yeah, and so let's just go rewind, not just Younger Dryas, not just 50,000 years ago, but into the age of the Sumer kings list of kings that were ruling 246,000 years ago. And let's just say that it was still just an echoing remnant of a worldwide society that could use the Nazca lines as giant earth circuits, that the pyramid system had more to do with what was connected in the earth to the sky, that you and I are, and that they're engineering like metasequoia trees, and that the way everything is laid out from what's above the earth to below is well organized, not just for muting earthquakes, but for either transmitting piezoelectric signals literally through the soil itself. And we already know that there's the discharge when you walk barefoot, but let's just say we're all connected. We're not 10 or 15% conscious. Let's say we're 80 or 90 or 100% conscious. And you, as we travel through the solar system, as we travel through the galaxy, we are experiencing all sorts of different waves and frequencies that we may not have experienced. We think of the speed of everything in reference to its relativity to us. The reality is that we don't actually know what the speed of the universe is. And so as a side note rabbit hole, when you want to go back in time and you want to even go back 100 years ago, you have to not just think of time, you actually have to think of where literally was the entire planet, solar system, and galaxy an hour ago in reference to everything else. Because if I want to go back 5 minutes or 500 years, I have to be that place 500 years ago or 100 years ago or 5 minutes ago. And it's not just in time, it's in space. And so we're traveling in. You and I, we live indefinitely. We have cells that repair themselves. We're conscious of it. And we have a pyramid power plant system. And mind you, we always like to imagine our past by the relics of these megalithic structures. We frequently don't consider that the ancillary technologies to build and move and manage these machines, to engineer ourselves, to understand how to do piezoelectric switching at the cellular level, that these are abilities that may have been something that we programmed many, many millions of years ago. and developed into a high technology that we now think and we quote as nature. But here's a society that's using things like the Nazca lines or the Bolivian Nazca lines, and they're using other things around the world that are gone and dusted and rusted and recycled. But this is a worldwide planet filled with a one-world society that doesn't actually die unless there's maybe extreme disaster or brings people back, which is why we have the idea of reincarnation. In reality, the sliver of truth may be what I was saying earlier, is that collective human consciousness may be a way through ones and zeros to keep or store, whether it's in a plant, an animal, a bug, or all of humanity, a way to support your consciousness. Because if you're not the same person you were 6 months or a year ago, we can have a long conversation just about what makes your soul when every cell in your body's replaced. But now they're not growing old. And here we are in this society that's tuned the universe and tuned the world. But we've reached a new point in the universe. Let's just say we go through a storm. And you and I are going to walk to one of those Greek amphitheaters. Well, but they're not Greek. They're very advanced at this day and age. In our ancient past, 60, 70, 80, 100,000, 200,000 years ago, maybe a million. But we're back in time. And again, a side note, the Sphinx, the Egyptian weathering, Baalbek, Lebanon, there's many indications of ancient weathering that shows tens of thousands of years, including Stonehenge, and standing stones all across Europe, dolmens. These are large megalithic structures that at some point the parts that were in the ground show well-hewn sides and polishings and cuttings that could have only been done by higher technology people. But here we are in our advanced society, not growing old, and you personally, Mark, seem very irritated and kind of perturbed, and I personally have cancer because we have gone through a portion in our travels as a planet through the galaxy, and we've hit some sort of energy storm that was not able to be filtered out by the way we've tuned the planet. And what's happened is that we have cells within our body that are mutating, that are transforming our aurora, that collectively, because we're all in communication with each other, because we're at that 80, 90, 100% consciousness, and we have our pineal glands active, but we end up at that Greek amphitheater, and we go to watch a play. And that play, we have synesthesia. We have the ability to sense other people's touches. We have the ability to see numbers as colors, or colors as flavors, or flavors as numbers or colors. We have the ability that actors on that stage, as we sit in the stands, not only can we hear them and see them and feel and sense what they're acting out in their play, your irritation starts to fade. My cancer starts to be healed because Anthony Holland's work, to your point, Anthony Holland bought Royal Rice's work. And you can watch a TED Talk, everyone out there. He was a music professor that thought, what would vibrational frequency energy have? What kind of effect would it have on MRSA? I mean, this should be like why would, there's more money again in not just preventative. There's always something we're going to get. There's always something that's going to come. You don't actually have to manufacture it. Just Carillion photography, MRIs, developing it further would be an endless amount of money than the existing paradigm for all those big tech companies out there at the gray state that's worried about not making money. I don't think they realize that if to stay healthy and be healthy is a longer game and a better game than the game they understand now. And that brings us full circle where you and I are in this, what is not just a Greek amphitheater. It's a healing center. It's a center where extreme vibrations and frequencies are amplified between everyone sitting there, their auroras, their collective energies. They are amplified because instead of it just having a stage and actors in front of them, there's another machine that as of now we can only imagine or is missing. There is another amphitheater. There is another directional frequency and energy that's being directed towards us, like Anthony Holland's latest work, where the vibrations and energy is required to tune out the cancer, the irritation in your mind, and for us to retune the entire global network of the way we manage our from our ionosphere down to our engineered soil. That is all being tweaked again because it appears that we're entering into a universe-sized storm that for the next 100 years, our solar system is going to be passing through. And we had to tweak the total global vibrational energy frequency machine system to that storm. And those are the things that we don't currently have eyes on or understanding of. And I'm just throwing it out there for everyone to play with it in their own minds. It's definitely stuff that I talk about in my book, but I think it is a huge shift on the way we've considered our health and our existence as humanity goes in the past.
Well, to use another example out of your book about living a healthy lifestyle, there is the Wim Hof example, and you actually met him.
I trained with him the very first time he came to America. I was there. I was lucky enough to be a part of the first 100-something people, and we trained right alongside him. He was right there, literally alongside everyone, and it was pretty amazing. But yeah, I got to learn how to do Wim Hof from Wim Hof in San Francisco on Treasure Island.
Yeah, I just wonder. In the last year, had to learn. I was introduced to like the vagus nerve, work. The other information you present. Don't let the pain bother you. When we did our Houdini show, the guests were talking about Houdini in the 1920s or so. Houdini had, as his stunts became more elaborate and death-defying, he had trained himself not to panic, and we see them doing, basically applying all these ancient techniques so that he's kind of like like a Steve Austin without being bionic. It's just being in his natural self, but it was through the training. It was a really interesting story that you gave us. One of my questions is we have been looking at what we're understanding today of the human body. How much of that is actually just being rediscovered concepts that might explain why Sumerian, this one Sumerian king, was had a reign of 800 years, or why Methuselah was nearly 1,000 years old when he died. You just kind of wonder if there's like some kind of connection there.
Yeah.
And eating soil out of the black soil. They seem to the ancients who were using the black soil it sounds like they might have been more vegan, and we get that advocacy in the Bible as well. You mentioned that in the book of Isaiah. You just wonder how much of all this science it is all incorporated into people being like superhuman.
Yeah, I don't think we're we're not even close. I mean, neurosurgeons talk, some will hold up their pinky finger and say, this is about what we know of the human brain. We didn't know the human brain could repair itself. Well, it does. The heart does repair itself. It doesn't just scar. It does repair itself. We have Dr. Gerald Pollack describing the fourth state of water called easy water. And that is, again, not frozen water, not evaporated, not hot boiling or snow or ice cubes. The reality is that we think that there's only a few states of water, but there aren't. And it's in living tissues that they find easy water. That's what they've called it, EZ, elephant zate. But it's very interesting for us how much of it are we discovering that's really just a rediscovery when you have right back to where we started with Solon being told by the Egyptian priests, you Greeks are actually very old. You're very young now in where you think you are, but the description that we're in an age of decline. Why is the Pythagorean theorem showing up in Sumer? Why are they using pi? Why is that in the Egyptian pyramids? Why is it that they're mummifying people? Was there a time within even reincarnation? Is it that the memory that a fully conscious human race with a collective consciousness can literally grab a physical human being, a spirit of a human being could be regenerated into a new human being because the collective consciousness of that person is never failed within the total living structure of what you could term as Gaia, which is a very Isaac Asimov term, by the way, for those of you who haven't read the entire iRobot to Foundation series. I mean, the very last book for Foundation and Earth, no giveaways here, but that would be a good shot for Avatar, except more complex. And the series, it gets into the idea that you're not not only you're not disconnected from the planet itself, but it's not that the planet itself is alive, it's that it's been engineered to connect. That's something to consider. That the engineered soil to our genes and the plants and the animals are all here as a living network. So even with the Bible saying, well, at one time the baby laid on the cobra's den and everybody was friends and you could talk to animals. Well, how far away would that be from truth if even with 100% brain capacity, if you think, even if your neural synapses are not equal to Einstein's, because Einstein donated his brain to science. And when they looked at his brain and they look at where what we theorize memory is located, the branches that hold memory look like a forest. They branch out like a tree, where some people might be the Charlie Brown Christmas tree. But here's the thing, though. Let's say that Einstein was only 10% conscious, and his 10% might be like 30% consciousness of some other people. But what if someone else had a peak consciousness of 30% or 40%, but they had a neural network, honestly, more like the very sad-looking Charlie Brown Christmas tree. So they had a capacity that was at or beyond Einstein's, and it was because of the other collective reasons of what you call consciousness existed for that person. So it's not, I think, everyone's one way or within a certain scope and only has one ability. There's a possibility that there are varying states of how we are in this, as Graham Hancock puts it, a species with amnesia. Collectively speaking, Anthony Holland's work of picking up royal rice and these different states of what we're rediscovering, not only about water, but about the way the human body actually manages to connect all of it to a high-functioning, interconnected system where maybe we did not eat plants or even animals. That, like the Bible says, one day we're all friends and we're talking, and then the flood happens, and God's like, screw it, eat all your friends. Well, that's not how he puts it, but, I quote it specifically in the book. But the point is that maybe there's some truths in that even at 100% consciousness, whether you're Einstein or Charlie Brown Christmas tree, that at 100% conscious, you still can't manage all the information that's coming to you through synesthesia. Is considered a disability. It's considered, or a different ability. It's considered something that, when I mentioned earlier, where you hear colors and numbers and sounds and smells, and all your senses are mashed up, where you look at a color and maybe taste something, or you taste something, or somebody says something to you about a taste or a color, and you see numbers, or you hear a number and you taste something. I mean, there's a million different ways synesthesia works. And I've brought it up before, but even with all these incredible, insane Wim Hof, controlling your heating, your cooling, your vagus nerve, your inflammatory response, being able to regenerate or generate old cells and stay basically youthful, or pick a point, or again, you replace every cell in your body. You know, do you want to be 40 one year and 20 the next, or stronger or thinner or taller or a giant? There seems to be no real eyes on why the cellular system only ages to one direction and quits. We actually don't know those answers at all. But within that entire system of how the human being could live or die, what if we needed our animal friends and the plants to process all the vibrational energy, also therefore, in quotes, information coming from out of this world, so that the plants and the trees and the soil itself was one connected network that could filter? And for those of you who are anime fans, not like a Pokemon or a Pikachu, or but think of an avatar. Think of your animals and your plant friends as this connection that allows you to filter the noise of the complete universe. That's just food for thought.
It is.
So now,
go ahead. I think what the last hour and 37 minutes has been food for thought, and
yes,
that could be a nice segue into ideas you have in the works about doing some exploration, which would be getting people to have more food to put in their brains, which is a good thing. And you have a little talk coming up as well. I think Dennis is trying to stop hauling brush from the forestry project to give you a call about a couple things. I just wanted to make sure we had a little bit of time to talk about your interest in motivating people to get back out and explore, just for legal purposes, just be aware of, the virus situation. But, you do want to people to rediscover, the Columbus spirit, or, whatever explorer, you want DeSoto, just throwing out just examples, the Templars, just get out there and reevaluate get out of the house and see what's going on. Try to develop a new perspective. So what?
Yeah,
Jared, what do you want to do? What do you have in the works? What how do people contact you to learn about what you're doing?
Yeah. So first, I have notaliens.com. And so there you're going to find my book, which is I actually sign them and go to the post office and send them out. If you're out of country, just email me and we can make it work. It's just that it's a little more expensive. But you can get a signed copy of my book there. And also there's a members area where I have exclusive interviews and things that are going on and things that I can't talk about on YouTube or places that I might get banned. But then of course I'm on Amazon, but for traveling right now I'm planning an expedition back to the Grand Canyon, and I'm also going to be I'll start with America's Stonehenge, which is Dennis Stone. His site, I know, it's America's Stonehenge, and his name is Dennis Stone. And he's a wonderful human being. He's become a good friend. I really appreciate, and I'm excited to participate in some archaeological work at America's Stonehenge. It's been featured on America Unearthed, but at the end of April, if you would like to join me, I will be at America's Stonehenge. I will post on notaliens.com. You can purchase a ticket, and I will be providing my book, and I will be doing a 3-hour lecture, and then there will be a break. And then if you'd like to tour America's Stonehenge with me, we will be going over it. It's in New Hampshire, and that will be Saturday the 1st. I believe that's the 1st of May. And it will be a really good time. So that's the first thing that I will physically be at this year that you guys can all... America's Stonehenge is open. Please, if you can go. It's not that expensive. It's an amazing site. It's 110 acres, and it has been an active archaeological site for 70 years, and there's over 800 sites between the East Coast and Canada that are similar. There has been carbon dating of findings to at least 8,000 years old. Like I said, it's been on America Unearthed. So America's Stonehenge is amazing, but I will be there that last weekend of April into May 1st, for that Saturday. So that should be really exciting. But the first weekend in April 2nd, Friday night, I am the keynote for the Forbidden Knowledge News virtual conference. I will be the keynote at 7 o'clock. I believe that's Eastern. And then on Saturday, Jim Willis, author of 13 books. He has, man, I love this guy. He has so many of the same insights.
He's popular with us. He's going to be back for a couple shows next month with
that's awesome.
with us. Yeah, he very nice guy, and Jan's great, does great representing her dad.
Oh yeah, and just a brilliant researcher, and the work he's done from quantum. I mean, again, it's the same deal. It's this our history we've been told is not true, and at a minimum, but more exciting, there's ways to self-experiment. So when we talk about being safe, and what you were talking about is that I'm always looking for some info on the Grand Canyon also. I am a climber, and fortunately I have some friends that are brilliant climbers and route setters, and we are planning an expedition. I'm sure plenty of people out there have heard of G.E. Kincaid's Egyptian finds. I don't care if they're true or not. I want to be very clear with everyone. The Grand Canyon has what we've been able to find out so far, and this started with Gary from Everything Imaginable. He and I do a show regularly monthly, but the big thing with the Grand Canyon is that G.E. Kincaid found a cave that's about 1,700 feet from the rim that was filled with Egyptian artifacts and a bunch of other things, and possibly was occupied by the son of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, that he and thousands of Egyptians came to the Grand Canyon. That's where they lived out their time. Maybe. But more importantly, what's interesting about the Grand Canyon that we've been able to find out is that the story keeps being perpetuated. And as a climber, and as having access to the group, the brilliant group of human beings that I am able to tell you is able, capable, and ready, and we are planning a trip back to the Grand Canyon to do some climbing, not to make the routes challenging, but we're specifically targeting caves. We're not looking to splunk. However, we are looking to locate some rock cut openings, and I know a lot of people have gone down the Grand Canyon, so if anyone would like to forward with an email, this is the great thing about being not just a listener, but a self-experimenter and explorer. If you've been to the Grand Canyon or know someone that has seen some peculiar openings, as in square or rectangular or even round, or just if they felt something odd about a particular genetic memory, by the way, is something we all share. Sometimes it might be an instinct or a hunch. You might just look at something, you know something's off. You don't know why. It's not just an instinct. It's something that I know we've touched a little bit on, but it has to do with that longevity, that passing down of experiences and memories, and or tapping into that collective consciousness. And some people have gone down the Colorado River and they've taken some photos, but you can certainly email me at notaliens it's us at Gmail. You can find me on YouTube at Not Aliens also, or again at the site notaliens.com. And you can send me an email, but we are looking at targeting not to extensively enter anything, but to look for rock-cut ruins that are at a height that are not easily explorable. And one of the exciting things I can report to you right now, which has only been talked about like once in the last 3 weeks, and what we're excited to find is that there's almost no splunking cave information for the Grand Canyon. And what that means is that there's lots of caves and there's lots of openings and lots of people look for minerals. And there's the story of the Kincaid Cave and the amphitheater that's down by the river that people go look at, that can hold thousands of people. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for rock-cut ruins. So not Pueblo Indians, not Anasazi, not any of the mud brick building constructions that may have been done by some of the tribes over the last Diluvian period here, over the last post-Diluvian groups. We're looking for rock-cut caves that are not just natural, caves that have been cut. And so we're going to make our effort to go back to the Grand Canyon and check that out. And as soon as we have some locations that are optimally picked, we will be putting that expedition on the way. The equipment is not the issue. It's just locating where we can go. And it's a long way down, but there's places in Wyoming like Devil's Tower. They have 900 to 1,200 foot climbing routes. And it's not about the difficulty. Yeah, we're not creating difficult routes. You can do routes like that in 3.5 hours. But again, I climb a lot, and although I do a lot, there's the people that would be setting this. We're not trying to pull a free solo Alex Honnold sort of thing. What we're trying to do is build safe passage to ascend or descend to locate ruins that we think are anomalous to the canyon, to what we would consider the dynastic indigenous peoples. So yeah, we are looking for ruins that would indicate tens of thousands of years of occupation ago, where it may have been a higher technology that they might be rock cut. And again, sure, Egyptian dynastic peoples ruins would be interesting, but the reality is a lot of people have been to the canyon, a lot of people have been in it, a lot of people have taken helicopter rides. You can do that, but there are no-go, no-fly zones, and don't need any repeat stories on that. We know that. What we're looking for are anything that you have a gut feeling or photographs that you think might be helpful. Feel free to email those. So that project is coming up first. And then, of course, Antarctica, we just had a big conversation with Brad Olson. He's been to Antarctica. A lot of people don't know that you can actually go to Antarctica. But before I go further on Antarctica, I just want to make it clear. We're going to be at, again, I got the Forbidden Knowledge News Conference at the first weekend of April here, Friday and Saturday. But at America's Stonehenge, if you'd like to meet me and hear a lecture in person, it should be really fun. And then the site should be pretty brilliant. If you want to come to New Hampshire, that's at the end of April. And outside of that, Dennis Stone has graciously accepted mine and Jennifer Deo's help. She's an archaeologist. She's a good friend of mine. And we are going to be doing research at America's Stonehenge. There could be a dolmen on site. And that has to do with the antiquity of ancient advanced humans, by the way. So anywhere you are in this world, anywhere you are in this country, if you have a dolmen near you, you should go look at it. You should go see it. Look for square cut, rock cut, unweathered edges. Dolmens are very mysterious because they really seem to be very, very ancient structures that were maybe adapted for post-Diluvian flood or post-catastrophe societies that used it for maybe some other purpose. But go look for dolmens. But we are going to do some research at America's Stonehenge, and we're not going to do it the weekend of the lecture, the weekend of the tour at the end of April. We're going to go to visit. There's an event we're going there for, but specifically, like I said, I'm going to speak on Saturday. But then we're going to plan the Grand Canyon trip, and then there's a very close to home for me. Something I'm really excited about, Jennifer Deo and I doing, is a dig in South America. The plans are complex because it has to do with seismic metamaterials and the idea that our most advanced ancestors, not only having control of our genetics, had control of sounds, waves, frequencies, energies, that vibrational medicine and energies of, they understood the universe like we don't. We're rediscovering it, but I am planning a trip to work out some of those seismic metamaterials that they possibly use to build megalithic structures. And that's where I want to start. So those are the things that are actually on the table. And I appreciate you giving me a platform to even chat about them a bit. So if any of that sounds interesting to anyone, I try to get back to people as best I can. So feel free to send me an email.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this on, only one of the times Maria was a guest where Thomas Hardy in Tess of the D'Urbervilles talked about the book ends there. Just gave it away, but he does talk about Stonehenge hums, and he was a local boy. Yes, he was an architect, a trained architect as well, but he visited the place. He was familiar with it. That's just an example of a late Victorian author commending what we're just rediscovering it, and I think that's the right term to use. I think early on in my journalism career, I probably said, we're just discovering that now. It's really rediscovering, I think, is a more appropriate term to use. And they just, I think, in tonight's show and throughout your book, you give us so many examples of how advanced the ancient people were all across the world. One of the places is fascinating. We have like 6 minutes to get into it. Is Nan Madol? How are they getting all those huge blocks out there in the ocean?
Blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a city I talk about in the book, and I think what's important is it's another example. We brought up pyramids, and they've, again, people have to consider that they've been maintained, they've been repaired, they've been adapted to not just a culture that has been continuously there in the last few thousand years, like when Robert Schoch figured out the Sphinx was, maybe 36,000 years old or 20,000 years old. Yeah, so here's Nan Madol, and again, the biggest mystery is that there are more basalt stone blocks there to build this flotilla, basically a Venice of South Indonesia, that it's South Asia. It's a city that, again, you can canoe through it, you can boat through it. It's built basically in the water, but it has enough blocks that you could build the Great Pyramid or more. And I don't even think they have an entirely exact count, but I think it's a fabulous example of a place that has dragged what I think were pre-existing blocks to build a post-Diluvian flood culture city. I don't think that they carved it or sorted it out themselves. That's not a single society. I think they found what was broken and used and broken, just piles of a prior societies. And again, the metal, plastic, glass, any other, all things disintegrate. Stone, not so much. It weathers, So like
Right.
standing stones and Stonehenge itself is mysterious in that there is weathering on site. And the Stonehenge that people see today is not how they found it. It's not all the stones. It's just a interpretation of what they think Stonehenge should look like. That should frustrate people to no end. It is an interpretive rebuild. It is not the original construction, nor is it that all the blocks are from a single period. Again, you have the perfectly smart, capable, and ingenious later cultures being able to not only decide that they're as romantically in love with Stonehenge, but being able to locate the actual quarries that it came from and adding on to it. So Nan Madol, you have again these large blocks that again just to carry them and stack them. And I like to use Graham Hancock's reference for this because if you were to place a block on the pyramid every 2 minutes, it would take you, even if you work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would, and you did it, mind you, you have to cut it and place it in 2 minutes. And most of the stones came from, I think it's like 200 to 400 miles away. But you have,
there was a lot of transportation.
but let's just say they were cutting and transporting and placing them every 2 minutes. And that would put the construction of the pyramid between 23 and a half and 27 years at 2-minute intervals. Now you have Nan Madol with as much or more stone. So the same level of effort to build the existing structure, and it looks very primitive. Yet we have dolmens, we have standing stones, we have Stonehenge that clearly look like they've been adapted by multiple cultures. And I want to bring a quick shout out to Easter Island, to Rapa Nui, because the moai are not all equal. There's about 1,000 moai. Of those, the most, take a guess again, the most complex, the most well-cut, the most complex carving and polishing are on the ones that are made of the hardest stone, of the basalt. There's about 150 of them. But the later moai, the ones that came towards the end of the society, were made out of the softest stone. They were much less complex. So it really looks like another culture came. And the earliest accounts of Rapa Nui was that there were blonde-haired, that there was multiple types of people on the island. They weren't just all Polynesian, black-haired, dark-skinned, that there was redheads, there was blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Accounts was that there was a vast variety of people on the island by the earliest contact point. But that aside, again, the earliest statues were the most complex. A few of them, the British Museum helped themselves to 3. Like they got them off the island. And the point, though, is that, again, the most complex come first. And then later, it get like Göbekli Tepe. You have large megalithic pillars, which the description of the original columns, very complex. And then they said, oh, well, we found the quarry. Mind you, it's 5% dug up. But they found the quarry. So why wouldn't later post-apocalyptic, post-Diluvian flood dynastic peoples, nomadic dynastic people, in other words, other people than those who built it originally, adapted it, cut it up, and then mimicked what they found? So the same thing with Nan Madol. You have a massive pile of a wrecked building where all the wood's gone, the plastic's gone, the metal's gone, but they have this giant pile of stone, and they adapted it and built that city.
Jared, we have, we're just about out of time. Hey,
oh, yeah.
Check out Jared on notaliens.com. We'll see everyone Thursday night. Thanks, Jared. Bye.